Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, and I hope everybody enjoyed the lunch today. My name is Kajal Shetty, and I work for the licensing team at BizTalk 360. I'm so excited to be here and to introduce our next speakers, Jeff Hollan and Kevin Lamb. Kevin Lamb has been in Microsoft for 20 years and has worked as a developer for Windows and BizTalk. He is the principal program manager for BizTalk Azure Scheduler, Logic Apps, Azure Services Manager, and other services. And Jeff Hollan is a senior program manager for Azure Logic Apps Service Cloud. He is very passionate about leveraging cloud technologies to light up the innovative solutions that transforms our world. Today, in their session, they will be talking about the power of integration of Logic Apps as an introduction to the service. Please join me in warmly welcoming Jeff Hollan and Kevin Lamb.
Good afternoon, everybody. Everybody had a good lunch? They're ready for next sessions? Okay. So hopefully we'll leave you today with some exciting information and you guys edgy at wanting to use Logic Apps.
There'll be laughs. There may be some tears. It'll be a great journey together.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. Before I came to Microsoft, I had worked for Reuters building foreign exchange transaction systems, and not that far from here in Old Street. So I had a little stint here working in New York and London building those old systems. And we've come quite a way from the back-end system integrations that we had to do to make those worldwide systems work to where we are today, and the ability to build similar systems, but much faster with much less infrastructure and work. So today what I'm going to do is talk about what is Logic Apps. And this will be a nice primer so that as more sessions go on today, you have a nice feeling and understanding of what the Logic Apps are. So as we go into the nitty-gritty details in our future sessions, you'll have a basis of that understanding. How many people have not used Logic Apps? Oh, about a third of you. Okay. All right. So this will be mostly focused at this level set. But we'll give you some new information along the way as well. So what is Logic Apps? Right, Logic Apps is about powerful integration. Right, we've built a designer that allows you to do really exciting work. It's an innovative designer that makes it really easy to start utilizing connectors that we have to the various SaaS and services that are out there. Because of the design that we have with this intuitive designer, it makes it really easy to quickly create new applications in the designer. With the connectors that we have, all the connectors are treated the same, the connectors and triggers. And so once you use one connector, you're very familiar with the product, and you can start using other connectors in the same way. It really allows you to think about, instead of focusing on a particular API service or a thing that you're integrating with, it's really allowing you to think about the mashup. What's the mashup, and how do I bring all these things together to make the applications that my business really needs? Right, the businesses are now no longer integrating 1 and 2 systems. They're integrating 10 and 15 systems. Hey, I have my data in Box. I have my data in SharePoint. And I have my data in SAP. I have my data in wherever each department is deciding to put that data in. How do I put all those things together? And we've made that really easy with our designer that we've built. It's also built for enterprise integration and mission-critical applications. We have the performance and the availability that allows you to do thousands of messages per second with high availability. And finally, create, deploy, and manage and monitor your Logic Apps. Of course, it's not very interesting if you can't deploy it to the cloud, but it makes it very fast to go create a Logic App, publish it, and have it run within seconds. Serverless technology. So Logic Apps is part of Microsoft's core strategy for serverless technologies. So what is serverless? Serverless allows you to have event-driven scale. What that means is that Logic Apps is an event-driven service that will scale to the incoming events for your service or for your Logic App that you need. And it also abstracts all your servers. You don't have to think about building out servers or IaaS machines or thinking about scaling up your PaaS platform to meet the needs for that day or for some holiday or scale it down. So we've reduced the DevOps that you have to do and all that time you spend in actually building those systems out to handle the workloads that are coming into the system. With the new designer and Logic Apps, we allow you to have much faster development for those Logic Apps, so then you can focus on the business needs as opposed to all of the infrastructure that's around it. So with that, you don't have to think about, hey, how do I do tracking? How do I do exception handling? How do I think about all the code that I just used for all the deployment needs that I have? All that goes away with our serverless product, and you get to really focus on that, on the business needs, and you get to market much faster and faster than your competitors, or making your businesses happier because you're getting those long list of IT products and requests done when you really were pretty slow before. And finally, micro-billing. So we only charge per action execution. And what this allows you to do is that you can have, instead of trying to predict that you're going to have some big event and having to scale up your infrastructure and then pay for that infrastructure that's not being used, but you needed to scale it to your maximum throughput so that it could handle it in case some bigger workload came in. So now you don't have to worry about those anymore. We will just bill you when you get an event comes in and with micro billing. So that reduces your costs, right? Because you're only paying for what you use. If it's quiet, nothing's happening, then you're not getting charged. With Logic Apps, each action is charged. So a trigger event or an action is charged. So if you look at your Logic App, you'll have a number of action steps. Each of those steps that it actually executes will be charged. So if you're in a for each loop, each step in that for each loop will get charged. But if it doesn't do anything, then you don't get charged. So with Logic Apps, we have a number of connectors. Connectors allows you to interact with the different services in an abstracted way. It really canonicalizes all the APIs that you've had to work with. So you don't have to think about, hey, what's my authentication model to this API? What's the message format of this API? We've abstracted all that for you for each of the connectors that we have. So connectors create a nice abstraction for your interaction with Logic Apps. The connectors are hosted, they're managed connectors, and they're hosted in our service, so they will scale to meet your needs. You don't have to think about scalability of those connectors. And because you have that consistent experience across each of those services and APIs with our connectors, that again allows you to have that rapid development experience. And then as you use a SQL connector versus a DB2 connector or going into a box connector, all those have the same look and feel and the ability to take a token, which is an output, and then drag it and use it as an input for another field. To use those connectors, you create connections. And connections are an Azure resource. And connections are used for your configuration and for your authentication. So you can do that once and then reuse it, or use multiple connections to the same resource if you want to differentiate your identities or your configuration. Those connections are Azure resources, so they can get deployed alongside with your Logic App, and then easily managed in the portal as well, where you can go ahead and reconfigure those connections. So last year, when we came and talked about our Logic Apps and connectors, this was the list of connectors that we had. Right? It's about 20 or so connectors. We've been busy, and we now have a few more connectors. I used to go ahead and update a slide every time I did a presentation, and because every week we actually release new connectors. So it goes on, and it just keeps on going. So we have over 160 connectors in that list. And it's hard to keep up because we're building the connectors that you guys need and making sure that we're constantly adding those to the service. So about every 2 weeks, there's another half a dozen connectors that come out. And it's exciting to see all these connectors come out. So one thing I did want to call out is that we have a number of connectors to both Azure services and Microsoft services. So you have about 20 connectors to that blue list is the set of Azure connectors. So we have connectors to storage and SQL Azure and cognitive services. And so all these services that we have connected to, and in Microsoft, so in Dynamics and Office and Bing, even things like Wunderlist and Visual Studio. So, Logic Apps is really the fabric that connects all these services together. And so anytime that you have an Azure service or Microsoft service and you need to figure out how to communicate with another one, Logic Apps is your answer for that. We've made it really easy to take those services and mash those together, along with the other services that in the third-party services, like Salesforce or Box, for example, and go put all those together. So, what's coming? So we always have new connectors coming. So this is not an exhaustive list. This is, we'll call it the interesting list. Some of these are a little further out, and some of these are closer.
The highlights.
Yeah. Azure Storage Tables. Yay. No, okay. So we already have queues and blobs, and tables. Table storage is coming out pretty soon. Oracle EBS, so Oracle Business Suite. These are one of the important enterprise connectors for a lot of businesses that rely on Oracle. ServiceNow. So there was a little sneak preview in the keynote for using ServiceNow.
It wasn't in the keynote. They haven't seen it yet. There's a sneak preview in our thing.
Oh, there you go. Well, I just let it out. So there's a sneak preview in the demo that we'll do. But ServiceNow is being worked on. You get to see a sneak preview of it later today. SOAP. Yay. Yeah. Little groans out there, yay. So this is one of our most asked for connectors. We had a moment where we were starting to work on it, and then there were some doubts and questions about how will users really use it. We are committed, and we're going to make that SOAP connector happen. How many people would use a SOAP connector? Yeah, all right. So,
I'm still a little bit new. Is this like to cleanse your data or something? I don't know what is SOAP.
He's a funny guy.
I'm kidding, you guys.
Service principal. So, in connectors, in your OAuth connectors today, you have to do, when you authenticate, you have to do interactive logon for your OAuth connectors. And so one of the abilities that we've added to our backend is the ability to use service principals, so then you can do headless auth. And so what's going to be coming is that the connectors that do OAuth will start adding support for service principals, so then you can do headless auth against those connectors, so that makes it easier to do deployments. We'll see a demo of that tomorrow at our dev session. Custom connectors. Just pause there for effect. So if you want to build a connector on your own and you want to be able to consume it in your subscription, you will be able to build a custom connector, deploy it, and have it treated just like any other connector that we have deployed. So for a lot of those scenarios where you're using the HTTP action, for those who are familiar with, I'm going into this side of the room that people know Logic Apps. For those people who are using HTTP action, do that today, and people have been asking us, hey, how do I take my credentials and put it someplace for that HTTP action, because you have to put it right into the Logic app. Well, now if you create a custom connector for that endpoint, we'll make it really easy to create these custom connectors. Then you can have a connection that has your credentials, and they're encrypted and managed separately from your Logic app. And so that'll be one great way to be able to manage that connectivity. Everybody excited about custom connectors? Yay. All right. We need more coffee. Okay, so Logic Apps is event-driven. So, it's not like the old days where you wrote a bunch of code and it was an NT service that's running in the background and waiting for something to happen. You don't have to write that anymore and have some machines that are up and running and waiting for that to occur. We handle all those events for you. And so the way you handle an event is with a trigger. The trigger is the way that you instantiate a new instance of a Logic app. And we have different types of triggers. Each of the connectors will have its own set of triggers for triggering their service into Logic apps. So the first one is recurrence and advanced scheduling. So you can have a Logic app that just starts up on the recurrence that you care about. So every minute, every 30 seconds, every month, go ahead, create a Logic app and run this Logic app that I have. John, in the keynote, mentioned about advanced scheduling. So in the engine itself, we actually support advanced scheduling so that you can do the first and last day of the month, that's Friday at 2 and 3 p.m. You can go create some pretty crazy schedules. So that's actually there today. The advanced scheduling in the UX will be coming soon as well. So the next way of being able to trigger a new instance of a workflow is through polling. So you can have, as your trigger, the trigger is actually asking a service, do you have any more data for me? Do you have any more data for me? You can set that polling interval every 5 seconds or every day, go ask for new data. And once the service responds with new data, then a new instance of that logic app will be created and work on that data. Next is a webhook. Webhooks allow you to subscribe to a service, giving it the endpoint to your logic app, and then your logic app will just sit there, and when the service decides to call you, it has now that webhook that it can call you, and it will call you back, and a new instance of a logic app will be created. And finally, a request. A request is really like an API endpoint for your logic app. So you can instantiate a new endpoint and then have anybody call it. You can call it from Postman, or you could use it as a webhook to somebody else, and they can just call you, or even from using like a get verb, because you can change the verbs on requests, call it from a browser. Logic Apps is workflow. So at the heart of Logic Apps, it's a workflow engine. So that workflow engine is really a set of actions, right? And you've organized your set of actions to invoke. Typically, you're invoking different services. You're calling an operation on a service to perform some action, right? And so you're going to ask it for data, you're going to ask it to do something, and then you organize your actions in a set of steps. Actions have behaviors. Behaviors could say, I want a timeout on this action. So if you've been waiting for a certain period of time, stop, and then we'll get a status code saying that it's been timed out. Or you can have behaviors such as, I want to treat this sequentially, or I want to be able to run after a particular error has occurred on a previous step. We also have flow control. Flow control is your conditions. You can have an if-then on your logic app. You can have a switch statement in your logic app. You can have a for each, which will iterate across a collection and do the set of actions on each of those items in that list, and a do until, so that you can do some interesting either advanced retry logic or do until some event occurs or some state has changed within your logic app. Variables allows you to have dynamic values inside of your logic app, so you can set it. And you typically used inside of, for example, a do until loop, where you can use it as a counter or a reference, or some people use it as more static values. They can create a complex function once and then reference that output as a variable later on. We also have message handling. So message handling do things like, hey, convert between an XML and JSON, call an XSLT, a map between two XML schemas, convert binary to string. So we have a lot of different ways you can do message handling, XML validation. And finally, expressions and operations. And we'll have a nice session tomorrow where we'll go into the bowels of expressions and operations. But this is where you have the power and ability inside of our definition language to actually call expressions and little functions to do things like get the current time, or give me a GUID, or convert between these two types, or do array manipulations. We have a lot of built-in capabilities that you don't have to go write code for, and do it right inside of the definition language itself. Logic Apps is also B2B enterprise messaging. So in Logic Apps, we have an integration account. That integration account allows you to manage your trading partners, so partners and agreements. It allows you to do EDI, so Edifact, X12, AS2 processing. XML handling, so we store your schemas and maps for both XML and flat file handling in that. And it does business tracking, so that you can actually add tracking info to your integration accounts, and then that integrates well with OMS. How many people do EDI? Wow, good number, you guys.
Yep.
That was more than I expected. Awesome. EDI. Yeah, so Logic Apps really does a lot of work with EDI, and we're seeing more and more customers starting to do more complex EDI scenarios on top of Logic Apps. So it's great. Logic Apps is secure. So one of the things to note is that Logic Apps is an Azure resource. So being an Azure resource gives you all the Azure resource capabilities. And one of those is RBAC, so role-based access control. that allows you to configure that control for your logic app. So you can define who can go and edit or create or view your logic apps. And we have built-in roles so that you can do an operations versus an owner of the logic app, and so you can get different views on RBAC. And also, as being an Azure resource, we also get the auditing, so we get to see who's made changes to your logic app. Logic apps has static IPs, so then you can configure your firewalls to only allow logic apps to go into it. You know it's actually coming from our systems. We also have IP constraints. So on your request endpoint, you can indicate who's allowed to access my request endpoint. You can actually set that IP constraint within your definition, as well as setting IP constraints on who can view your monitoring view. Sometimes you have sensitive data in your monitoring view, and you only want it to be accessed by a particular machine or portal, and you can configure that as well. And we allow you to regenerate your access keys, either because you have a policy that says you have to regenerate your access key every 6 months, or you were compromised and you need to go ahead and reset those. So Logic Apps is manageable. So we have, as part of our manageability story, we have a trigger and run history so that you can actually see every time your Logic App has been triggered or every run that's happened. When you pick one of those run histories, you get a great monitoring view. That monitoring view will show you the exact same design as you have in your designer for your Logic App, and then all the inputs and outputs for every step that has actually been run. So it's a very intuitive model for being able to see and understand what's happened within your Logic App. We also have version history and rollback. So every time you save your Logic App, we record that version of that Logic App. And then you can go back in the version history and then pick a particular version, then roll that back to that version in case something went wrong or you just made a mistake and want an older version of your Logic App. Integration with Operations Management Suite. So particularly we put a lot of work on the B2B side so you can get some great experiences in Operation Management Suite. And log analytics that you can configure also shows up in OMS. So you can configure your Logic App to emit to storage or event hubs or log analytics, and then that stuff shows up in OMS. And finally, Visual Studio tooling. So as a developer, you can use the tools that you're familiar with as a developer to go ahead and build your Logic Apps and even discover them with Cloud Explorer. And Logic Apps is certified. So this is some breaking news. Well, not the first one. The first one came out last month. So Drummond AS2 certification was out last month. But ISO 27001, SOC 1, 2, and 3, HIPAA, and PCI DSS we have all those certifications now for Logic Apps. Those just got released and I think should be up on the Trust Center today, if not yesterday. It's there? Okay, so it's all up in the Trust Center, so Logic Apps does have all these certifications. There are a lot of enterprise customers where some of these are important, obviously for retail, the PCI, and for healthcare. But now we have these, so it's awesome. Yeah, so we've been busy. So, Jim mentioned in the keynote how some of you complained that we were working too hard or too fast. I'm not sorry. I am. My wife may be sorry, but since our last when we talked here last year, we've had a lot of time to do some features in Logic Apps. So this is the not complete list of features that we did since last year. It was a lot. We did a lot of work, right? And a lot of this is from your feedback. We've worked really hard to making sure that we're listening to you and adding the features that you care about into the product, and making sure that we're enhancing and making it even easier to use and adding more capabilities to the product. And we will continue doing this.
Yeah, while he's switching to this next slide, and I know this is the big one, but it is really important too that we do stay connected to the challenges that you're facing. It's exciting as Kevin's going through some of these features, whether it's inbound IP filtering or Visual Studio tooling or whatnot. I almost think back to conversations that I've had with a number of you, with customers when we do visits like this, whether it's Skype calls from Redmond or when we're on site. And I can map those conversations back to these features that we're shipping. So we're going to show you some of what's coming. We talked about things like SOAP Connector and ServiceNow. But take the opportunity this week while we're around. If you see us chatting during lunch, don't hesitate to come poke us and introduce yourself and even let us know, hey, this is where I'm struggling today, or this is what I think you're missing still. And then next year when we come back, you'll see as we do more scrolling text, you'll be able to point to your thing and be like, hey, that's when Jeff was eating his rice and noodles or whatever, that I told him that that's what we needed.
Or tell us how much you love the features that we built.
Yeah, or you've done everything and taken a nice vacation. That's fine too, whatever.
But yes, as we said, we're not done. We have more features coming. Tomorrow, so Jim announced during the keynote that we're releasing the UK region. So those guys are actually hard at work right now, actually verifying our UK data region. So we're actually in those regions, we're just not public yet, and they're doing connector validation, some other things. And hopefully by the end of the week or early next week, you'll be able to actually use the UK data region. So that will make us available once we're in the UK. We'll be available in all public regions except Korea in Azure. So all the public regions will be lit up. Expression authoring and IntelliSense. Yeah, all right. Jeff let a little cat out of the bag during his, I did see that one. I was imagining it.
The first click stop didn't yet have IntelliSense, but.
So, we have a really rich expression functions in Logic Apps that you can use. And people forget that and start using, they go ahead and write an Azure function, which is the right thing to do if there's something that you need to do and write a little bit of code. But a lot of folks don't realize that we actually have a pretty powerful expression engine under the covers that you can do right in line in Logic Apps, so as part of your JSON definition. And so part of that is just discovery and being able to understand how to write those. And so we're going to create a designer experience so that you don't have to go to your docs and then go to code view and write these things up, and give you a nice first-class experience for being able to author your expressions and then actually get IntelliSense to help you out and build those expressions. Now, of course, with more expressions, you need expression tracing. So in the monitoring view, we'll be able to show you the actual value and the expression evaluation, right? Because you can get some nested and nasty-looking expressions. We'll be able to look at that in monitoring view and show you each of those evaluations. Advanced scheduling. So I gave a hint at this earlier. We have advanced scheduling in the engine today, and we'll be working on making some nice changes to the designer so you can actually do these advanced schedules right in the designer on that card. Large messages. So we are feverishly working on large message support so that you can have 100 meg and even gigabyte messages flow through Logic Apps to other services. Drafts. Who wants drafts? Well, I got to tell you what it is first. So, whatever it is, I want it. So, when you're building your Logic app, you don't want it to actually go out into production yet, and you want it to try it out, and you want to build it and not have it be active yet. So we're giving you the ability to add drafts to your Logic apps or build it as a draft before you deploy it. And so then you can have essentially a set of drafts that you're working on before it's actually deployed to prod. And so you can go ahead and run those drafts and make sure it's working before you go and publish it. So these are draft releases of Logic apps. Anybody want drafts? Yeah, now people want drafts. Okay. And then along with drafts, then you get mock testing. So, everybody likes that one. So then you can manipulate your inputs and outputs for certain steps. So then you can see actually how it would flow in your Logic app. In your draft, you have mock testing, and you get to look at those code paths. Resubmit from a failed action. So one of the features that we have in Logic Apps today is the ability to resubmit at the trigger, at the beginning of Logic App. So you can go ahead and rerun a Logic app with the same input that you had from that logic app. Now we'll be able to resubmit from a failed action, so anywhere in that logic app, go ahead and run from there. Tracking and monitoring across logic apps. So for you guys who have multiple logic apps and you want to be able to get some insight across those logic apps, we'll be working and building similar capabilities that we have with B2B, but for generic logic apps, so then you can do more interesting queries across your logic apps instead of being stuck in a kind of single logic app view to see your runs. You get to see things across your runs in logic apps. And I think finally, batch. So John in the demo this morning talked about batch. So you'd be able to send messages to a batch and then have criteria for when that gets released in your logic app. So that's coming really soon because he just showed a demo of it. Okay, now on to the demo.
Great, awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Showed a bunch of great stuff that we're working on. And if there were any of those items that piqued your interest, whether it's mock testing, again, even if it's not telling us what to build, if you're like, hey, by the way, with the mock testing feature, I really want to be able to set 18 different mock responses and dynamically choose which mock response, whatever. Just tell us what you want and we will build it. Okay, with that in mind, I do want to show you a little bit more hands-on in the last 15 or so minutes of building a logic app. I showed you some in the keynote today, but this will show and highlight a few of the other different pieces of functionality that call out what we've talked about so far. So with Contoso Fitness, back to our wonderful gym whatever that we've started. One of the things that is very important is premier support for customers. So you notice here this customer, he's obviously just done this really big run. He's super tired and strikes the perfect pose as he drinks his water bottle. That's one of our customers and members that we want to make sure is happy. And if you're like me and you know how a gym works traditionally, some of the equipment is good and some of the equipment is not so great. I know when I go to the local gym in my city and there's 7 or 8 treadmills side by side, I know I either want the third one or the fourth one or the last one because the other ones are kind of garbage. The thing sticks a little bit when you run or whatever. So this is a problem Contoso Fitness had as well. They need to be able to maintain their equipment, make sure that it's quality all of the time, and that they can fix things as they need to. So traditionally, a lot of the repair requests that they were making were because something had fully broken. Wow, this is rough. Can I blame jet lag too, Dan? Because it had fully broken, right? But that's not always when things need to be repaired. Sometimes things are starting to break or just not perfect. But they didn't know about those instances because members weren't always being proactive in reporting them because it's kind of a pain to be like, oh, by the way, treadmill 1 sticks a little bit. So that was an issue that they were having. So they had to rely on members to report many of the issues. It had to take, either an email or someone coming to the front desk before they knew something was broken. And what also happened behind the scenes is that Contoso Fitness has a vendor company that comes and does the repairs on their equipment. And that vendor company tracks all their tickets with ServiceNow. So let's say that you do come to the front desk, and maybe I'm working at the front desk, and you say, hey, this treadmill's working a little bit weird. Can you get it to fix? Now I've got to take some time out, log into ServiceNow, create an incident so that our vendor can come in and support it, which is a manual process. The last piece of information isn't necessarily in the equipment management directly, but once every quarter or year or so, we make a bunch of purchasing decisions. We need to decide what new equipment do we need to buy and where do we need to purchase that equipment. And the challenge is that the person who does our equipment purchasing, which we'll say is Kevin, Kevin goes and he looks and he sees how many pieces of equipment we have in each plot, and then he'll place some orders. But he has no idea of all of the data that's been happening for all of these incidents that we've been reporting to our vendor team. So Kevin may keep ordering the Model 600 treadmill, even though we've had so many problems with the Model 600 treadmill, and we tend to only get a useful life of a couple months out of it. So there was data somewhere in our company, but because it wasn't integrated everywhere, Kevin wasn't aware of that data, and he potentially was making incorrect purchasing decisions. Now, obviously, I'm not giving this scenario because I expect all of you will own a gym one day. Maybe, I don't know. But obviously, you can take pieces of this scenario and apply it to the problems that you are facing, apply it to the scenarios that you do deal with, because there are common themes throughout. So what we're going to build quickly is a logic app that will allow someone so that we, as Contoso Fitness, because we're super tech and cool, we bought a bunch of these. So I'm holding here in my hand, this is a little IoT button. This is actually called a Flick. It was just a couple bucks. I bought it before I came. And we will take this Flick device, or hundreds of them, and we'll go ahead and sticky them on to all of our equipment with a little sign. So that if there's ever a problem with a piece of equipment, then a customer doesn't have to go find someone. They don't have to report an issue. If you make a run and you realize that it's not great, you just push the button. Wow, what a great sound. And it registers that someone has placed an issue. So we're going to build, I like this sound so much. It's technology. I don't know how, look, nothing in my sleeves. Ready? It's amazing, okay? So we're going to see exactly what's happening. Thank you. Yes. Any questions?
That's your demo, Vern.
Yeah.
Thank you very
much. There we go. So let me go ahead and present my screen, and we're just going to walk through what it would take to build this application. So obviously, we are going to call an API endpoint. This would be behind Azure API Management. We'll likely see later today or tomorrow how you can import Azure resources like Logic Apps to API Management. But here at the beginning, this is if you've created your first Logic app. In fact, I'm even going to go back because there were some of you who haven't done this yet. So you come into the Azure portal for any subscription. You click the New button, and in the greatest section of all of Azure is Enterprise Integration. That's where all the power is, okay? Go ahead and open that up, and this is where you can choose to create a Logic app or Service Bus or API Management or other pieces for integration, okay? So I've gone ahead and created one. It's empty. I'll open it, and this is the first screen I was at. So here's our template selection screen. So we do have a number of templates for you to choose out of the box. It wasn't in the list, but we will be providing a way for you to submit and contribute your own templates as well through GitHub, so that you would be able to continue to contribute and add useful patterns or scenarios that you've developed as well. Many of these help you understand things like here's how to do AS2 payload and reply with an asynchronous or synchronous MDN, right? Sounds like a great template. I'd love to know what that looks like. I can click it and get started. But for us, we're just going to start with a blank Logic app. Now, in our case, we have all these buttons, and all this button does is it sends an HTTP request securely to some endpoint. And I want that endpoint to be this Logic app. So I have here my request trigger, which can receive an HTTP request, as Kevin mentioned. And I could, as I did this morning, provide like a sample payload, but really this thing just fires a signal to a URL. It's not going to send a payload or anything. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use the advanced options and choose a specific method here. So you'll notice I could choose, get, put, post. I'm going to choose to do a post. And I can actually choose a relative path for the URL that's generated. So I'm going to create a path here that is / and then you'll notice it's a little bit hard to see, but I have 2 curly braces and then ID. And what that means is that in the path to this trigger, someone will put in / the ID of the equipment. And that's how I will know which equipment is being used. So I can even just save this now, and it's going to generate that URL. And you'll notice here, I'm not going to call it because this is a post, but you'll notice here there's a little slot here for ID. That's where I could put in any ID here. And when I triggered off the Logic app, I'd be able to pull that out and use it so that I can just program all these little IoT buttons based on the ID for the equipment that they're attached to. So that's my trigger. Now we just need to process the request. Okay, so I mentioned the first part. Let me make sure I have all of these pieces. I showed you this morning, I have Azure API Management, where we've managed a lot of our first-party systems and first-party APIs for Contoso Fitness. So in Contoso Fitness, I do have our asset management system. And this is our own on-premises system that manages all of our equipment, where it's located, when we purchased it, when we installed it. So I'm actually just going to get some information on the piece of equipment as the first step. Now, I do want to point out here, you saw this a little bit today. I can see all the outputs of my Logic app steps right here to select. And it even actually knows that I have an ID property as a path parameter. So it's very easy for me to say, use whatever ID got triggered and get the equipment from API management. So this will return to us information like, oh, this was in the London branch and it's treadmill 6. Now, I'm going to show you a sneak peek of one of our new connectors that's coming, which is ServiceNow. And so here would be a ServiceNow connector where I could create a record in ServiceNow automatically. And this way, we can notify our vendor without having to do that manual process to say, hey, someone had an issue with this machine. And ServiceNow is incredible because it has all of these different types of assets or records. I can choose one. And what's actually happened is because I'm connected to my ServiceNow account, it gives me all of the different fields for this specific record. And ServiceNow has a bunch of fields, so I'm not going to fill most of these out because they're all optional anyway. But I'm just going to go ahead and fill out a short description and say, a member reported an issue for, and we'll just say device name. And I probably need the ID. Okay? So you'll notice here when I typed in that field, I'm able to very easily switch between typing text and dropping in these kind of outputs from different steps. Again, just helping that speed of development, popping in values as you need them. And then finally, the last thing that I want to do is I want to make sure that Kevin, when he makes his purchasing decisions, has the data that he needs where he needs it. So I actually want to store data on whenever issues are being reported so that we can act on it accordingly. Now, in order to do that, I have here from API management when we installed some equipment, and I also know when I'm running this app because I have today's date, or I will soon. But what I really want to know is how many days has this machine been in service before it had an issue, so that I could do analytics later and be like, oh, by the way, for this model, it has a useful life of 700 days, and this model has a useful life of 600 days, which lets Kevin make some great decisions to say, you know, we have a few treadmills reaching end of life. Let's go ahead and proactively either repair them or replace them, creating that great customer experience. Now here, though, I do need to create some custom logic. I need to calculate the days between two dates. And I have a few options in which how I could do this. So we do have the workflow expression language, which I'll show you in just a second. But another very vital piece of the Logic Apps puzzle are Azure functions. And actually, immediately after this session, in about 5 minutes, there is a phenomenal session on Azure functions. I've heard it is incredible. So we'll go more into Azure functions in a minute. But I do want to show you how within my Logic app, I can select from this entire library of the functions that are deployed in my subscription. So I can drop in any of these function apps and this functionality, well, that's a kind of cool play on words, into my Logic app. So I'm going to wait for this one. I actually haven't used this function in a while, so it fell asleep. So it's going to take a second to open up. But I will open up in another browser. I'll just show you quickly what a function looks like so that you see while this wakes my function up from sleep. There it goes, it woke up. So I wrote a quick function called calculate days. I'll open this up in a second so you see how easy it is to write a function. But what it's expecting is it's expecting two values to calculate the days between. It wants a start date and it wants an end date. Now, Kevin mentioned this expression language that we have. And if you actually click this help button right here, there's a link to an article that has all of our expressions. But that's not very discoverable because how many people click the help button? I don't need no stinking manual, right? I'll figure this out on my own. So we are starting to roll out this feature right here where I can select and author expressions within the designer. Now this should roll out beginning this week, but I will emphasize this is just the first step. We'll be adding much more to this in the coming weeks. So I can switch over to expressions here, and you'll notice I get a list of a bunch of these workflow expressions that we have. Whether I want to do things on like date time, so I want to get the current time, add seconds, add minutes, add hours. If I'm doing conversions between JSON and XML, I can do all of that here. Now, unfortunately, if I start typing UTC now to get the current time, you'll notice I don't have any IntelliSense. That will be coming. In addition, we will also add functionality so that you could test an expression or evaluate an expression before running your workflow, so you can kind of debug and author your expressions in this experience. So I will just go ahead quickly and drop in the time function of UTC now. I could also come in and start passing in different outputs, like if I wanted to format some date time, I could do that here. But I'm just going to go ahead and click OK, and that went ahead and added an expression to calculate the current time. So every time this Logic app runs, it will calculate the time at that moment and pass it into our function. And obviously, my function needs an end date to get the days between. And in that case, we will get the install date. Oh, I'm in some weird format right now. Hold on. I mentioned we were in the first click stop. Okay, install date. So I'll go ahead and do that. So that's all it would take for me to calculate the days between something. And now I could add an additional step to something like Azure Data Lake to drop it in. So I'm actually not even going to open the Azure function now, just for the sake of time, and that we are going to go into it later. But it is worth calling out that you can run Azure functions. And behind the scenes, this is like 4 lines of C# code that will run on demand and return back to me a number, which is the days between the start date and the end date. So now I could add this to SQL or Data Lake or so on. Now, in the interest of time, let's actually just abandon this. And here's one that I've baked earlier. Okay, so this is the one that is failing, and we'll see why. But this is okay, actually, because this gives us a segue. I thought that was why. So every time I push this, and you hear that beautiful sound, it's actually calling this logic app right here. Now, I do want to call out a few of the monitoring and management features. So we do have this run history view. I can filter this to get only the failures. I could also get all of them right here. So you'll notice on one that succeeded. Oh, you like the filters? Yeah.
You no longer have to go page by page by page and find the failed ones.
So I can open this up at any point and figure out, in this case, I did a calculate and I saw the date difference between June 26th and June 1st, which must have been when we installed this equipment. And we can see here that the function returned 756.5 days. So I get this debugging so I can very easily see exactly what's happening. In fact, these have been failing since I've been running this presentation, and I know why. It's because I'm using some bad credentials. And so I can actually open this one up and very easily see, hey, you have an access token that has expired, and that's because I'm using service principals incorrectly. I'll explain that tomorrow. But what's great here, and I do want to call out, is let's say I see that this has failed, and I fix it. I go in here and I re-authenticate with Azure Data Lake, in this case, to append that data. I can very easily come here and resubmit this run, and it will go ahead and re-trigger it using the exact same payload and fire it off again. It will fail again because I didn't fix it. But as Kevin mentioned, later this year, we will also allow functionality for you to say, you know what, I don't want to resubmit the whole workflow, just resubmit, but only do that last step because that's the only one that failed. Everything else looked like it worked, and that will go ahead and work. A few more things I do want to call out here quickly, just that Kevin mentioned. I have all of the versions of my Logic app that I can see at any point. So you can see the date times is me in my hotel room yesterday. I can open any of these versions. I can see what that version was, and I can even promote it into production as needed. I can manage all of the connections. So we had that connection error with my data lake connection. I could come in here and re-authenticate from right here, and it would have me log in and authenticate, but I'm using a service principal, so it's not working right now. Don't worry about that. Here's my security controls to restrict IP ranges for that trigger. And I also get nice diagnostics and monitoring out of the box. So I know for this Logic app, within the last month, it has 227 billable actions. 47 of them are triggers, and 180 of them are actions. So that's just a quick tour of the portal, of building a Logic app, some of the tools available to you, of monitoring, resubmitting, using things like expressions. I didn't go into it here, but you can also add conditions. So I do have this other Logic app. I'm not going to explain it, but this is once every day, we run a Logic app to let us know equipment that hasn't been maintained recently. So if it hasn't had a repair request in the last 90 days. I'll just call out a few actions worth calling out. I have things like a condition here. This is an advanced condition to know if I have any results. So you can do all this control flow stuff, whether you're filtering or doing conditions, creating HTML tables, just a lot of actions available to you to get you up and running very quickly. So that's it, more of a guided tour. Some new nuggets spotted in there, but for the most part, I guess I would encourage you to give Logic Apps a shot. If you haven't before, go into the portal, create a new one. It can be a trial account, it can be whatever. And the main reason is we have all of those templates there. We have a number of great blogs from people in the community, many of them in this room. See what works, see what you can get solve, and if you have any questions, obviously reach out to us. Which brings us to our call to action, right? So build some Logic apps, We will be at some conferences as well, so you can catch us on Microsoft's Channel 9. You can see recordings. Inspire in July, which is the partner conference we'll be at. There'll be an integration boot camp in Charlotte, in the United States in September that we'll be leading some hands-on labs. It's a full day where we just walk through hands-on labs across BizTalk, Logic Apps, and API management. And then Microsoft Ignite in September. We will be there with a booth and answering questions and presenting. Here's some links to our docs. We'll be sharing out these slides later, so you can get those links there. And Kevin and myself, and often John and Derek, we do host a monthly webcast where we give updates on what we've been working on. We tell you what's coming next, and we'll usually demo a feature or two. It's pretty informal. It's pretty fun. We have live chat. So check it out at Logic Apps Live. But that is it. So thank you very much. Grab us while we're around, and I'm going to transition into our next session of Azure Functions pretty quickly then.
All right.
Great.
Thanks.
Can I actually have your mic?